Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next webinar in our Tech Talk series. Today, we will be discussing TINES for governance, risk, and compliance. My name is Amber Langdon. I'm the product marketing manager for security here at TINES. And today, I'm super excited to be joined by Niall. Niall, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Niall Heffernan. I'm the senior GRC analyst here at TINES. I'm recent to NEO, so I joined back in January of this year. So yeah, excited to be taking part.
Great. Let's jump to our agenda for today. Pretty straightforward. So I'll start by sharing an overview of the GRC landscape, top challenges GRC teams face, and best practices for automating GRC processes. Niall will then share a demo of a story that he personally uses for GRC here at TINES. And at the end, we will have plenty of time for Q&A, so please submit any questions you have in the chat throughout the webinar. First up, let's discuss what governance, risk, and compliance, also known as GRC, means for security teams. Governance is writing and implementing policies and procedures. Risk is identifying, assessing, prioritizing, and mitigating risks that could negatively impact the company. Compliance is ensuring the company adheres to laws, regulations, and other industry standards. And governance, risk, and compliance are typically grouped together just due to their reliance on each other. For example, if governance is done properly, this then reduces risk and helps with compliance. Compliance should also be kept top of mind when creating policies and procedures. Governance, risk, and compliance is top of mind for company leaders now more than ever due to new government regulations. The US SEC cybersecurity disclosure requires companies regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission to disclose and describe all material cybersecurity incidents and share information on their risk management programs annually. The penalty for not complying with this could include fines, legal prosecution, and even jail times for their executives. The European Union has similar laws in place and requires companies to establish appropriate teams to respond to incidents. Company leaders can also be held liable for noncompliance. And as a result of all this legislation, security teams are more stressed than ever. We surveyed 900 security practitioners and leaders for our Voice of the SOC report, and 63% reported that they're experiencing some level of burnout. Additionally, 30% of the respondents for the report ranked compliance as one of their top 3 day-to-day challenges. When implementing a compliance process, GRC leaders typically first determine what the applicable regulations are for their company and industry. Without automation, the rest of the compliance process is very manual and includes manual evidence collection, implementation of controls, and monitoring. Now I wanted to share how TINES can help you automate your GRC processes, and then Niall will share some of this live in the demo as well. First up is our ability to streamline GRC processes such as regulatory research, policy management, control testing, and audit preparation. Many organizations also leverage TINES for enhanced risk management. TINES can aggregate data from various sources for risk identification, assessment, and mitigation. This enables the GRC team to prioritize risks effectively. Organizations also use TINES to improve policy enforcement by automating policy distribution, tracking employee compliance, and detecting violations. TINES can also notify your GRC team in real time if there is a policy breach. And then last but certainly not least, TINES can help accelerate audit processes by optimizing data collection, documentation, and analysis, cutting down on your audit time and effort. Another benefit of TINES is we can connect to any API, and today I want to highlight one of our technology partners, Drata. Drata offers automated continuous compliance and supports over 20 different compliance frameworks. Together, TINES and Drata streamline security compliance and ensure adherence to regulatory requirements. We also use Drata internally, and Niall will be sharing more about how he uses Drata in the demo. To drill down just a bit further, here are a few examples of stories in the story library for governance, risk, and compliance. The first story I wanted to highlight enables organizations to automate running vulnerability scans and adding the evidence to their compliance system. The next story we have helps organizations monitor devices to ensure they are active. Devices that have not checked in may be inactive, which of course poses a security risk since they could contain sensitive data. If a device does not check in for a number of days, a Tynes case will automatically be created. The third story provides employee training reminders. With Tynes, the organizations can automate those reminders to complete the assigned security and compliance trainings. The next story automates providing information, such as a SOC 2 report after an MNDA is signed in DocuSign. And the final story example adds user evidence to a compliance system like Drata in order to keep records up to date and satisfy compliance requirements. These are just a small example of what you can do for GRC with Tynes. We have over 60 pre-built stories in the library for GRC, but of course you could build anything custom as well with how easy it is to build in Tynes. And now I'll pass it over to Niall, who will provide a demo of a Tynes story that he uses for GRC.
Cheers. Thanks, Amber. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to give a quick demo of a story we built that we use to automate the data collection for background check evidence to kind of support our SOC 2 compliance. So to give a bit of background on this, we are using Zinc Work for our background checking software. Now, Zinc doesn't have a direct integration with Drata. It also doesn't have an API that we can leverage as well to automate those data collection processes. So we have to kind of think a little bit outside the box with it. So up until now, we were kind of manually inputting that evidence into Drata. So we'd have to, every time a new candidate was going through that background check process, we would have to go into Zinc, we'd have to search for that user, we'd have to find that URL for their background check report, and then manually upload it to Drata, which was pretty manageable, but as we're growing and hiring more people and onboarding more folk, that's not becoming sustainable. So we had to have a brainstorm about how can we actually automate this and make this a lot easier for ourselves. So this is why we came up with this story. So when we were thinking about possible solutions, we were looking at the data we had access to. So we had access to Zinc, but obviously there's no API, we couldn't automate from that. So one thing we noticed was that we were getting to our compliance inbox a confirmation email from Zinc saying, hey, we just completed a background check on Niall, here's a link to the report. So we thought, okay, this has everything we need for our evidence collection. Maybe we can leverage this in the Tynes story and automate it. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate to you now. So in this tenant, I just want to preface this that this is a demo tenant. So we are leveraging that receive email action. So that means that when we receive an email to this action, it will trigger the workflow to begin. But because it's a demo environment, we haven't configured that completely. So we've just created this kind of event transform email action just temporarily. But what I'll do first is I'll show you an example of the email. So this is the email we'd get from Zinc. We see check completed for Niall Heffernan, and we get a link then to the candidate report. So for Drata, for the background check, what they look for evidence is the URL for the background check report and the time it was completed. So with this email, we have the time completed just from the time the email has been sent. We have the link to the report, and we have the name of the user that it's related to. So in our story, when I was saying about the receive email action, we've set up auto forwarding rules in Gmail so that when that Zinc email comes into us, we can push it to this receive email action within our story automatically. So when that happens, it will kick off our workflow. So what we're looking to do with this story is we want to extract a report URL. We want to extract the name of the candidate, and we also want to map that to an email that we can use when we're uploading it to Drata. And then additionally, we want to capture that as a record. So we want to store all this data so we can query it later on in the story. So I'll walk through a few of the actions that we have set up here. So obviously first, as I mentioned, receive email action. Temporarily, we're using this event transform, and we've preloaded the payload from that email. So that has the headers, the body of the message, and everything that we need to collect it. But once the email is sent in the production sense, they'll automatically kick that off. So first thing we're doing, we want to extract a report URL. And this is great because we get to use our automatic mode, which is built off AI. And all we need to do really in this is just give a simple prompt. And our prompt here is that we want to extract a URL for the text reference in the href for the review candidate report. And we can see that in the email here. So that's the link that's associated with this. Now, I will run through the story and we can see how this is generated. But as we said, we want to be specific with this because there's other URLs within that email. And we just want to make sure we're getting the actual link to the report that we need. So the next thing we needed to do, we wanted to get the name of the candidate so we could create the email from it. So in this, we're just using a simple regex replace function. And all that's doing is looking in the subject line, and it's going to take the username out of that subject line. And then what we want to do is we want to map it to an email. Again, we're using our automatic AI mode, and we're giving a very simple prompt. We're saying, hey, just extract the first letter of the first name and combine it with the last. And then we want to output that in lowercase and then append @times.io at the end. So that's our naming convention for our emails with internally. So that means we can have the URL, we're going to have the candidate's name, and we're going to have an email associated with them. So then once we have that data, we could store it in a record. So in the we created a record called background checks, and in it we're storing the URL, the name, the email, and the date completed. And the date completed is being taken from the actual email body itself. So I'm just going to run this story, and we'll see how it's extracted. So first off, we'll go to the URL, we'll check the prompt. It gives us a code output. And then the output itself is the link that we have in that email. So that's our first step. That's great. That's one of the key elements we need for our evidence. Next, our regex, we'll check the event data for the extract name. Perfect, Niall Heffernan. That's what we needed. And then map to email. Again, we used the AI prompt. We got our code output and then our output and Heffernan at times.io. So then we can check then our records, and we have that stored there. So we keep in the background URL, my name, my email, and the date the report was completed. So what I'll show you now, the next step is we're going to be uploading into Drata. So on Drata, under the personnel tab for my user, we have the background check is marked as X. So once we run through the story, the second half of the story, we should see that update to green and we'll be in compliance. So if we go back to the story, we're going to kick this off with a HTTP request, and we're using the Drata API to do this. So what we're looking to do with this request is we want to pull all the personnel we have in Drata who do not have a background check assigned to them. So how we do this, we're using the public URL API from Drata, and then we've added a bit of customization to it. So we're looking for the employment status of current employees, we're looking for current contractors, and we're looking for future hires. And we're also looking to make sure that that check compliance is equal to false. So that's saying that any of the personnel we find in Drata who do not have a background check assigned to them. For the purpose of the demo, we're just filtering a my name just to make sure we're not exposing any candidate's personal details. But in our production, this is how we'd be doing it. Next, we want to explode on those findings. We want to break them into the individual users so that we can query it better. After that, we're using this template, the times list records with a filter template. So what this will do is this is going to compare those findings from the explode we just did to match with our capture record here that we have here. And this will query the data and look for matches. And what we want to do with this is we want to make sure that the field ID for the email ID that we generated matches the email from the user that we just found we pulled from Drata. Now, if it does match, great, we can move on with the story. And what it will do is then it says, hey, we have a user in Drata that has no background check, but we've captured a record showing the background check has been completed. So let's upload it to Drata as our evidence. And that's what this last request is going to do. So this last request will upload into Drata as evidence. It's going to upload the list records background URL, and it's also going to upload the date completed to assign to that candidate that we just finished our check on. So I'm just going to run this, and hopefully, if the demo gods are good, we'll get completed all the way through. And it looks good. So if we go into Drata, if I just refresh this page, we should see a green check next to my name. Hopefully. And yeah, there we go. So we're checked. So the reason I wanted to show this story as opposed to other time stories we're using for GRC is that we were met with a problem that we felt like we had a blocker, that we couldn't use a Zinc API. We didn't have an integration with Drata. So we were using manual steps up until we kind of brainstormed and came to this solution. And we kind of were really kind of proud of this solution, kind of thinking of using the email itself, the confirmation email, to trigger off this story. And it's been, works pretty great so far. And this also kind of sets us up for future stories when used down the line, where we might not have that API available. We might not have an integration with our end tool we're looking to use. And yeah, we can use this templates going forward. So it's, yeah, I'm pretty proud of that one, and I enjoy it. So it's not the most complex story, but yeah, it's definitely extremely effective.
Awesome. Thank you for that great demo, Niall. So I just wanted to wrap up this portion of the session with a few additional GRC resources that you could find on our website. We'll also share links to these in our follow-up email for today's webinar. The first resource is a blog written by our head of IT operations and IT security, Braden Maxwell, on how we use Tines internally to achieve SOC 2 compliance and saved over 250 human hours during the process. I highly recommend checking out this blog if you're going through SOC 2 or any other certification. We also have a blog on how security teams leverage Tines for GRC. And as I mentioned earlier, in the Tines library, we have over 60 pre-built GRC stories for you to leverage. Thank you everyone for joining, and we're now going to answer any questions you have. If you haven't already, please go ahead and submit your questions. All right, let me check what is in the question box. First question, does Tines integrate with any other tools besides Strata for GRC? And I could take this one. The answer is yes. So in those 60 stories, we integrate with a ton of other tools in the pre-built stories, but with Tines, you can connect to any tool that has an API. So your possibilities are really limitless there. Next question, it likely came in before the blog mentioned, but Niall, I'll let you provide a little more detail on this, is have you used Tines for audits?
Yeah, I think that demo we just showed there is kind of one element of how we use Tines for audits around the data collection, and that blog by Brandon is brilliant as well. That kind of goes more in depth in how we're using Tines, but not just for audits, but also for kind of that preparation around audits, and also making sure that we're staying within compliance throughout the cycle of our compliance certificate. So we're SOC 2. We're on a year-long monitoring for it. So we want to make sure that we're not just playing catch up with evidence collections a week or 2 weeks before the actual audit itself. So we're using Tines consistently to build that evidence, using Drata to collect that evidence and monitor for it. But then we're also using Tines for our day-to-day governance as well, which also helps telling that story to our auditors. So as Amber mentioned at the start of the webinar, we're using it for security rate awareness training reminders. We're using it for access management as well, and automating those processes. So they're always good stories to tell the auditors, and also be able to show them. Even like in my demo there, we have the record captured for all the evidence for the background checks. That's a second source of truth we can use. If there's any discrepancies throughout that audit, we can reference back to that, talk our auditors through the story itself, and hopefully that satisfies them.
Great, thank you. Next question that came in is, how does automation help when regulations change so often? How much work is it to make changes to a story? And Niall, I'll let you take that one too, based on your experience.
Yeah, I mean, A lot of times with the regulation changes, really the actual process of evidence gathering is the same. I mean, there's a lot of overlap across the different regulations in terms of from a cybersecurity point of view. So I don't think it needs that much of a change in terms of per regulation. Obviously, sometimes some regulations will have more controls and more requirements, which might be involve more evidence collections and more process put in place within the company. But in terms of actually changing a story, it's very easy to do. Really, just want to know what your data is, what you're looking for, and then you could configure it. Like even with my demo there, we can use that story template for different elements as well of it. So, and that's the great thing about Times. It's so easy to do and amend as well. So definitely get building and playing around with it.
That's great. Thank you. And just to add on to what you just said, for anyone who's not currently a Tines customer, we do have our always free community edition. So you could sign up directly on our website and get building in Tines today. And those are all the questions I saw in the chat. So if there's no other questions, I just want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. The full recording of today's webinar will also be sent out tomorrow in an email along with the resource links that we shared. So thanks again for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thanks, everyone.